gasoline prices aren't having such a big impact this time. Why not?
Yeah, here I get to argue against what Paul was just saying,
I was going to say,
right?
you and Paul were like duking it out over there for a second.
Well, okay. I mean, so first of all, as he was just saying, prices not yet where they have gotten at times in the past. We were almost to $4 last spring. We got over $4, like $4.11 on a national average back in 2008. We're at $3.65 now.
Yeah, but this time of year, it wasn't this time of year.
Oh yeah, we're
at a different time of the year, and that people drive more at other times of the year.
That's right. So we're going to see prices keep going up. We may well test that $4, go up above $4. If we do, people may react. So, I mean, that's one piece of it. But there's also some reason to think that we are in a better position to weather that storm now than we were last year or than we were in 2008. I mean, think 2008, when prices hit their peak over the summer, we were just at the onset of what turned out to be a cataclysmic recession. Last year, different situation, but we were still very much in that tentative period. Don't want to get overexcited about the recovery now, but we've had another year of deleveraging. We've had real job market gains, which we really hadn't been seeing at this point in time last year. So there's some indication that the economy is in a better position to weather that storm.
And just on a practical level, though, to put it sort of, back in the hands, or let's say the feet of the people who are pushing the gas pedal, they've started to make adjustments in the way they live to reflect these higher gas prices. Isn't that true?
Well, so, I mean, for one thing, there's the shock value, right? $4 was a huge shock when we first saw it because nobody had ever seen it before. We've now seen it twice in many parts of the country. So some of it is the psychological impact isn't as great. And then, yeah, people have learned how to adapt a little bit. I was talking to somebody earlier today who was saying, I started a carpool back when prices went up in 2008. Prices came down, carpool fell apart. It's easier to drive yourself to work. But now she's calling people up and saying, let's get the carpool back together again. They know how to make those adjustments in a way that they didn't know before.
And that, in fact, is what economists say should happen. The cure for high prices is high prices. And when you have a higher price, people use less. I mean, that is the rationing, the pointy-headed economist in me says that's rationing, and that's what works.
So historically, oil prices have basically been a hedge on the U.S. economy. When the U.S. economy starts to get really strong, it drives up demand for oil, it drives up prices. High prices help slow down the economy, and vice versa. So lower oil prices then help speed up the economy. To some extent, that is being eroded now by the fact that the U.S. is not in the driver's seat on oil prices the way it once was. Chinese demand is up, Indian demand is up, developing world demand in general is up. So we now have the potential for high oil prices with a weak economy. But yeah, over the long term, if we use less oil, that will lower demand and could lead to more moderate prices.
What about the trucking? Sorry, did you want to jump in?
No, I want to hear about
what about the trucking business? Because as the economy gets going, we truck more stuff across the earth. We don't have an extensive rail network like Europe, and it's a much bigger place. So that extra cost, and that's diesel fuel, but it still comes out of the same bucket of oil. That is going to cut into profits. That isn't going to be very good, is it? And that's going to be increasing the cost of a loaf of bread, a burger, some tomatoes, everything else that goes up.
If you see sustained oil prices, not just a quick spike up, but you see something that lasts over time, then yeah, that filters through the whole economy. It hits corporate profits. If they try to pass those costs on to consumers, that hits inflation. That makes it more difficult for the Fed to act. So you see that throughout the economy. A short-term spike in prices, you don't feel it to the same degree.
Well, and I also just think, too, the point you were making before, people are just feeling a little bit more secure. They have a little bit more money in the bank, their savings, they've gotten their debt down a bit. They're feeling a little more optimistic about the employment sector. I mean, not to say that everything's coming up roses, but there's just a general sense. So when those things are feeling better, you just don't notice it as much. I'm not saying it's not painful, but as much.
But I agree with you. I think that's all great points. But I went to buy a loaf of bread the other day. It was $4. And,
what kind of bread?
It was just regular bread. I mean, it
So
was
the
just
question
regular
is,
bread.
when
I mean,
does this
so
get
does that go to
down-
$5? I walk everywhere. I'll go take the tube. But I mean, $4 for a loaf of bread seems ridiculous.
Well, I mean, so the real question starts to become, when does this go beyond food and energy prices, and when does it get into core inflation?
Right.
And if this lasts, it starts to get through the whole economy. It hits prices, it hits everything. Now, be clear, if oil prices are rising because demand for oil is rising because the economy is improving, that's all to the good.
But that's not what's happening here.
If oil prices rise because of a supply shock or because of fears of a supply shock, like we're seeing right now, then that can start to cool off an economy when it's not strong enough to sustain it.
It is a very good point. Now, the president has come out and talked about sort of saying, what can we do about this? And he's basically said he can do nothing. Is that accurate, that he can do nothing, or is it he can only do nothing in the short term about this?
Well, right. So there's short term and long term. Truth is, short term, he probably could do one thing, which is that he could open up the Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
Yes.
A few people have called him to do that, not many.
He's been very reluctant.
He's been very clear that that's not what they're going to do at this stage. Over the longer term, if we can cut demand for oil, or long term, if we can rise supply for oil, then those things can have an impact. But we use far more oil in this country than we have in oil supplies, right, as a share of global oil demand. And
oh, yes.
By a huge margin. And so ticking up production a little bit in one place or another is not going to have an immediate near-term effect on prices.
Well, it will have a near-term effect on the election for sure if they continue to stay this high.
That's a whole nother kettle of fish.
That's a whole nother kettle of fish.